There was a house in Westchester County where laughter guyed at the door. Inside, behind drawn curtains and polished floors, lived a woman who had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. To the world, she was Moms Mabley, the fearless comic, the bent-back trickster, the voice that made America howl. But when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, the costume came off, and something quieter, heavier took its place. Loretta Mary Aiken stood there instead, carrying secrets too large for any stage. This is not the story you think you know. It is the story of the silence after the joke, the truth behind the mask, and the life she guarded more fiercely than her fame. Because some legends are loud, but their truths are whispered in darkness. She was born on March 19, 1927, in Brevard, North Carolina, a small mountain town in the western part of the state. She was one of 16 children born to James Aiken and Mary Smith. Her father was a respected man in the community, a businessman who ran a barber shop, a cafe, and a general store on Brevard's Main Street, serving customers of all races at a time when that alone required extraordinary courage. He was also a volunteer firefighter. The family was not wealthy, but they were established. They had a 2-story house just outside of downtown. They had music. They had faith. And then the losses started coming before Loretta was old enough to understand what loss even meant. When she was 11 years old, her father, Jim Aiken, was killed when a fire engine exploded while he was volunteering at a fire. Just like that, the man who had built the family's foundation was gone. Her mother took over the general store and tried to hold the pieces together. A few years later, Loretta's mother was struck and killed by a truck on Christmas Day while walking home from church. Both parents gone before Loretta had barely entered adolescence. But the cruelty did not stop there. Before she turned 14, Loretta was raped twice. The first time at age 11 by an older man in the community. The second time at 13 by a white sheriff, a man who wore a badge and carried the power of law enforcement in a Jim Crow state where black girls had no legal protection, no recourse, and no voice. Both assaults resulted in pregnancies. Both children were given away for adoption. She was a child herself, carrying wounds that no child should ever carry, in a world that offered her no acknowledgement of what had been done to her. Her great-grandmother, a Cherokee woman named Harriet Smith, who was said to have lived to the age of 118, looked at this broken girl and told her something that changed the direction of her life. "There is a world out there," she said. "Put God in front and go ahead." At 14, Loretta Aiken ran away. She fled to Cleveland, Ohio, where she joined the African-American vaudeville circuit, performing in traveling minstrel shows and comedy acts across the American South and Northeast. The segregated entertainment world of the early 20th century ran on what performers called the Chitlin Circuit, a network of Black-owned theaters and clubs where Black performers could work without the humiliation of Jim Crow venues that refused to serve them. It was hard work and meager pay, but it was freedom of a kind that Loretta had never known. She met a fellow performer named Jack Mabley who became her boyfriend for a time. When the relationship ended, she kept his last name. She explained it simply years later with a flash of the wit that would eventually make her famous. "He took so much from her," she said. "The least she could do was take his name from him." She became Jackie Mabley, and eventually, as the years passed and her reputation as a mother figure to younger performers on the circuit deepened, she became Moms. By 1923, she was performing at Connie's Inn in Harlem, New York City, and the career that would define her legend began in earnest. She worked with Butterbeans and Susie. She performed at the legendary Cotton Club. In 1931, she appeared on Broadway alongside writer Zora Neale Hurston in Fast and Furious. In 1933, she co-starred with Paul Robeson in the film Emperor Jones. In April 1939, she became the first female comedian in history to perform at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. By the 1950s, she was earning $10,000 a week at the Apollo. an almost incomprehensible sum for a Black woman performer in that era, and appearing at that theater more than any other entertainer in its history. The character of Mums had fully taken shape by then. The toothless mouth, the oversized shoes, the floppy hat, the house dress several sizes too large, the voice like gravel and gospel mixed together, the jokes about old men being useless and young men being the only thing worth chasing. The audiences roared. The character was beloved. But the character was entirely constructed, and behind it lived a woman the public would not have recognized. Those who shared dressing rooms with her, performed alongside her, and called her a friend knew who the real Moms Mabley was. The moment the show ended and the stage door closed, the transformation was total. Off came the house dress. Off came the floppy hat. On went the silk shirt, the tailored slacks, the fedora. The woman who had just spent an hour on stage joking about chasing young men walked out the stage door with young women on her arm, dressed like the sharp, elegant person she actually was. Norma Miller, a legendary dancer and choreographer who shared dressing rooms with Mums throughout the 1940s and 1950s, described it with complete matter-of-factness. She said they never called Mums homosexual because the word never fit her. They never called her gay. They called her Mr. Mums. She and Mum's girlfriend shared a dressing room for 2 weeks. Nobody on the circuit talked about it because nobody considered it their business to discuss. It simply was. Whoopi Goldberg, who made a 2013 HBO documentary about Moms Mabley after spending decades performing as her and introducing her story to a new generation, found private photographs from the 1930s and 1940s that showed Mums dressed entirely in men's clothes, hair cropped short, posture confident and unmistakably herself. Goldberg described the costume, the hat, the shoes, the house dress, as exactly that, a costume, a character created for survival in a world that would not have permitted a Black lesbian woman to speak freely on stage if she had presented herself honestly. Mums invented an old woman because an old woman was non-threatening. She used that non-threatening image to say things that no one else in American entertainment was willing to say about race, about power, about the absurdity of the world she lived in. She also organized parties for the gay and lesbian community at venues in Washington, D.C. when she performed at the Howard Theater in the 1940s. One of those gatherings was raided by police. The performers looked at each other in the chaos and decided the only reasonable place to go was back to the Howard. Moms Mabley was not hiding who she was from the people who knew her. She was simply protecting herself from a public that was not yet ready to receive the truth. In the 1960s, the world she had built on the Chitlin circuit finally opened into something larger. Carnegie Hall in 1962, mainstream television appearances, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the Mike Douglas Show, the Flip Wilson Show, more than 25 comedy albums recorded. Her first album for Chess Records, The Funniest Woman in the World, sold over 1 million copies. In 1969, at approximately 75 years old, her cover of Abraham, Martin, and John reached number 35 on the Billboard Hot 100, making her at that time the oldest living person to have a top 40 hit in American music history. She performed at the Harlem Cultural Festival. She was invited to the White House as a guest of President Lyndon Johnson at the conference to fulfill these rights. She met John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. She turned down a second invitation from Ed Sullivan because he would not guarantee her at least 4 minutes on the air. She was, by any measure, one of the most successful and enduring entertainers in American history. And in her house in Westchester County, she kept her life the way she always had, private, contained, entirely her own. In 1974, she began filming her first starring role in a motion picture, the film Amazing Grace, shot in Baltimore, Maryland. During production, she suffered a massive heart attack. Filming stopped. She came back 3 weeks later with a pacemaker installed in her chest, resumed her role, and finished the movie. She was in her late 70s, and she was still working. Amazing Grace was released in 1975. It was the last film she would ever complete. Moms Mabley died of heart failure on May 23, 1975, in White Plains, New York. She was 78 years old. She was interred at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York. Following her death, Jet magazine reported that she left behind 3 daughters, a son, and an estate worth more than $500,000, substantial wealth for a woman who had started with nothing in Brevard, North Carolina, who had been raped as a child in a state that offered her no protection, who had run away at 14 with everything she owned and nothing the world owed her. The house in Westchester fell quiet after she was gone. The silk shirts and the tailored slacks and the fedoras stayed there. The real person who had worn them was buried in Hartsdale, a few miles away, under a name that told only part of her story. Whoopi Goldberg said it best in her 2013 documentary. Moms Mabley had been lost somewhere in comedic history. The woman who paved the road for Joan Rivers, Phyllis Diller, and every black female comedian who came after her had been reduced in the public memory to a toothless character in a house dress, when the actual story of survival, of secret identity, of extraordinary courage across 80 years of a world that tried at every turn to diminish her, was so much larger and so much more remarkable than anything she ever performed on stage. A girl from Brevard who was broken before she was a teenager and made herself whole through sheer will. A woman who lived 2 lives simultaneously for 60 years and kept both of them intact. A comedian who used laughter as armor, protection, and weapon all at once. The house in Westchester is quiet now, but if you listen closely to any recording she ever made, to the gravel and the grace of that voice, you can still hear everything she was never allowed to say out loud.